After 15 years in the military, I thought I understood rules and regulations better than most. As an Armory officer responsible for tracking, maintaining, and securing millions of dollars worth of weapons systems, procedure was my religion. So when I decided to transition to part-time service and buy my first home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, I actually appreciated that the community had standards. The rows of identical two-story homes with pristine lawns created a sense of order that felt familiar to me. The morning after moving in, I stood on my driveway admiring my new property. The sun reflected off the windows of neighboring houses, each one an architectural clone of mine. The only difference was my truck, a black Ford F-150 with military decals on the rear window and veteran plates. It stood out among the sea of neutral-colored sedans and minivans that populated most driveways. My new neighbor Roger wandered over with a friendly wave and coffee mug in hand. "Welcome to Oak Ridge Estates," he said. "Hope you are settling in well. Just wanted to give you a heads up about our HOA. They are pretty strict around here." I nodded appreciatively. "Thanks for the warning. I have read through the covenant. Seems straightforward enough." Roger shifted uncomfortably. "Well, there is more to it than what is in writing. Our HOA security officer takes his job very seriously. Some might say too seriously." Before I could ask for clarification, a golf cart with neighborhood security emblazoned on the side rolled to a stop in front of my house. The man inside wore a uniform that looked suspiciously like a police officer's, complete with a badge, utility belt, and an official-looking hat. Only upon closer inspection could you see that the badge read Oak Ridge Estates Security, rather than any actual law enforcement agency. He stepped out, adjusted his belt importantly, and approached with a clipboard. "Good morning, sir. Officer Daniel Mercer, HOA Security. I see you are new to the neighborhood." His eyes lingered on my truck before continuing. "I will need to verify that your moving procedures followed all community guidelines." I extended my hand. "Nice to meet you. I am James Sullivan, just moved in yesterday." He ignored my handshake, instead flipping through papers on his clipboard. "Your garbage bin is visible from the street. That is a violation, and your truck exceeds our vehicle size limitations for residential driveways." Roger interjected, "Come on, Dan. He just moved in yesterday." Officer Mercer shot Roger a stern look. "Rules are rules, regardless of tenure." He scribbled something on a form and tore it off, handing it to me. "This is your first warning. 3 warnings result in fines." I accepted the paper, maintaining my composure. "Thank you for letting me know. I will move the bin immediately." As he walked away, his attention returned to my truck. He circled it slowly, taking notes and paying particular attention to the military decals on the back window. There was something in his gaze that felt less like enforcement and more like scrutiny. Over the next few weeks, I received warnings for increasingly trivial matters. My grass was a quarter-inch too tall. My mailbox numbers were not the approved font size. The American flag I hung was mounted at a non-regulation angle. Each time, Officer Mercer would appear, clipboard in hand, with that same intense focus on my property and particularly my vehicle. One evening, as I washed my truck in the driveway, I noticed him parked across the street, watching. When I waved, he quickly looked down at his clipboard and drove away. Something about his behavior felt targeted, but I could not quite place why. Roger confirmed my suspicions over beers one evening. "He has been like this with others too, but seems to have taken a special interest in you. Some of us think he has issues with military folks. No one knows why." I simply nodded, filing away this information. In the military, Understanding the opposition is always the first step to addressing a conflict. But I had no idea then just how personal this suburban power struggle would become, or how my professional experience would ultimately be the perfect counter to his overreach. 3 months into my residency at Oak Ridge Estates, the pattern became unmistakable. Every Tuesday and Friday, Officer Mercer would patrol past my house exactly 3 times, taking notes each pass. I started tracking this in a small notebook, a habit from my military days where documentation often proves crucial. The warnings grew more creative. My holiday decorations were excessive, despite being identical to my neighbors. The trim on my house needed painting, though it was the exact shade specified in the HOA guidelines. When I replaced a broken window, I received a violation notice claiming the glass had unauthorized reflective properties, though it was standard double pane from the local hardware store. Neighbors began warning me about Officer Mercer. Mrs. Patterson from 2 doors down stopped me while I walked my dog one morning. "He has always been difficult, but since you moved in, he seems more aggressive with everyone, like he has something to prove." I asked her how long he had been the HOA security officer. "About 5 years," she replied. "Before that, he tried to join the county police force but washed out of their academy. Never talks about why." This information created the first piece of a puzzle I was slowly assembling. A failed law enforcement career, followed by assuming a position of pseudo-authority, suggested compensation for past disappointment. The situation escalated dramatically when I returned home from a weekend training with my reserve unit. A bright orange violation notice was taped to my front door, visible to the entire neighborhood. The offense listed was improper vehicle parking, commercial oversized vehicle in residential space. My truck was a personal vehicle, not commercial, and while larger than some, it fit completely within my driveway boundaries. The citation included 3 photographs of my truck from different angles, with measurements drawn on them as evidence. I approached the HOA board member who lived on my street, showing her the violation. "This is clearly selective enforcement," I explained. "There are at least 4 trucks of similar size in our neighborhood." She examined the notice and frowned. "Officer Mercer does have discretion in these matters, but this does seem unusual. I will mention it at our next meeting." The following day, I found Officer Mercer measuring my driveway with a tape measure. When he saw me approaching, he straightened up with exaggerated authority. "Is there something I can help you with?" I asked. "Just confirming your continued violation of Section 8.3 regarding oversized vehicles," he replied, tapping his clipboard. "Continued noncompliance will result in fines and possible towing." For the first time, I let my military bearing show. "Sir, this vehicle is well within allowable dimensions according to the written covenant. If you proceed with unauthorized penalties, I will be forced to address this with the full board." His face flushed. "Are you threatening me?" "No, sir. I am simply stating my intention to follow proper procedures, which is something I take very seriously in both my professional and personal life." At the mention of my profession, his eyes narrowed. "Your job does not exempt you from our rules. In fact, I have concerns about your line of work." Before I could respond, he turned and marched back to his cart. That evening, I noticed him driving slowly past my house multiple times, photographing my property. The next day, while retrieving my mail, I found an unmarked envelope containing printed photos of me in uniform getting into my truck, close-ups of my military decals, and even images through my windows of military books on my shelves. The images clearly came from a telephoto lens, taken from various positions around the neighborhood. That night, I invited several neighbors over to discuss the situation. Over drinks, the truth emerged. Roger admitted what everyone had been reluctant to tell me. Mercer applied to a private security contractor that hires ex-military for overseas work. They rejected him but took his roommate who was a veteran. He has had an issue with military personnel ever since. Looking at the surveillance photos spread across my coffee table, I realized this had moved beyond petty harassment into something more disturbing. The HOA security officer was conducting personal surveillance on me, apparently triggered by my military connection. This was no longer about suburban rules. It had become a disturbing vendetta disguised as community safety enforcement. As everyone left, I stored the photos carefully away. In the military, we have a saying, proper preparation prevents poor performance. It was time to prepare. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather for my planned fishing trip. Clear skies, mild temperature, and a day off duty meant I could finally break in the new tackle I had purchased. I methodically loaded my gear into the truck bed, fishing rods, tackle box, cooler, and a small canvas bag containing extra clothes. Each item was placed with practiced precision, a habit from years of equipment management in the Armory. As I secured the last item, a shadow fell across the driveway. Officer Mercer stood there, not in his golf cart but on foot, suggesting he had parked around the corner specifically to approach unannounced. His posture was rigid, his expression severe beneath the brim of his official-looking hat. "Good morning, Mr. Sullivan," he said, his voice carrying an edge that immediately put me on alert. "I need you to step away from your vehicle." I straightened up slowly, maintaining calm. "Good morning, Officer Mercer. Is there a problem?" He positioned himself between me and my truck, clipboard held like a shield. "I have received reports regarding your vehicle that require immediate attention." Several neighbors watering their lawns or collecting mail paused to observe the interaction. Officer Mercer seemed to notice the audience and stood taller. "What kind of reports?" I asked. "Concerns about the potential storage of unauthorized weapons in your vehicle," he stated loudly enough for others to hear. "As HOA security, I am authorized to inspect any potential threat to community safety." The accusation hung in the air, absurd and inflammatory. My heart rate increased, but years of high-pressure situations had taught me to remain outwardly composed. "Officer Mercer, I do not consent to any search of my private property. There is nothing in the HOA covenant that gives you authority to inspect the interior of vehicles." His face hardened. "Refusal to comply will be noted and reported to the board. If you have nothing to hide, there should be no issue with a routine inspection." More neighbors had gathered now, some moving closer to hear the exchange. Mrs. Patterson stood on her porch with her phone partially raised, potentially recording. "This is not a matter of hiding anything," I explained calmly. "This is a matter of private property rights. You are not law enforcement, and even if you were, you would need probable cause or a warrant." Officer Mercer took a step forward, encroaching on my personal space. "I have probable cause. Anonymous reports plus your military background and suspicious behavior." "What suspicious behavior would that be?" I asked. "Frequent loading and unloading of unmarked containers, refusal to comply with HOA directives, and your military position gives you access to restricted items." The pieces suddenly clicked together. He had been watching me closely enough to know I was in the military, but had misinterpreted or deliberately twisted that information. "Officer Mercer, I am a military armory officer. My job is inventory management and security of military equipment, which remains on base under strict protocols. Nothing comes home with me. Rather than causing him to back down, this information seemed to fuel his determination. His face flushed dark red. Your military status does not exempt you from community safety protocols, he spat, his voice rising. In fact, it raises additional concerns about your training and connections. He reached for the canvas bag in my truck bed. I need to inspect this bag and the contents of your vehicle immediately. I stepped between him and my truck. You will not touch my property. You have no legal authority to conduct searches, and I will not consent to one. Roger had now joined the gathering crowd, along with several other neighbors I recognized. The audience seemed to intensify Officer Mercer's performance. As HOA security officer, I am empowered to investigate any potential threat, he insisted, hand hovering near his belt where he carried a flashlight and what appeared to be a taser. Your attitude only confirms my suspicions. What you are attempting is illegal, I stated firmly. It violates HOA bylaws, state property laws, and potentially constitutes harassment. His eyes narrowed dangerously. Are you threatening a security officer in performance of his duties? I am informing a homeowners association employee that he is exceeding his authority, I corrected, my military training evident in my steady voice despite the adrenaline coursing through me. As someone who manages actual weapons systems professionally, I can assure you that your concerns are unfounded and your approach is inappropriate. Officer Mercer's hand now rested explicitly on his taser. Open the vehicle now, or I will report weapons violations to the board and police, he demanded. The neighbors gasped collectively at this escalation. I remained motionless, my eyes locked on his. Officer Mercer, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, I formally request you provide written documentation of your authority to search private vehicles. Until then, this conversation is over. His hand gripped the taser tighter, knuckles whitening. For a moment, the suburban street held its breath. Then Mrs. Patterson's voice broke the tension. I have the whole thing on video, Daniel, she called out. Might want to think carefully about your next move. Officer Mercer glanced around, suddenly aware of his audience and the numerous phones now recording the confrontation. With visible effort, he composed himself. This is not over, he muttered, low enough that only I could hear. Some people in this community do not appreciate your kind. He turned sharply and strode away, back rigid with suppressed anger. The neighbors lingered, several approaching to ask if I was okay. As the adrenaline ebbed, one thing became crystal clear. This had crossed a line from which there was no return. The battle line. Were drawn in this suburban warfare, and it was time to respond with strategic precision. The fishing trip was postponed. Instead, I spent that Saturday afternoon converting my dining room into what my military colleagues would instantly recognize as a tactical operations center. Not with weapons or surveillance equipment, but with documents, bylaws, community guidelines, and state property laws spread across the table. The confrontation had made one thing abundantly clear. This situation required the same methodical approach I applied to Armory security breaches. Identify the threat, assess vulnerabilities, develop countermeasures, and execute with precision. First, I needed to understand the exact scope and limitations of HOA security authority. I retrieved the community covenant from my filing cabinet and began highlighting relevant sections. Section 3.4 outlined enforcement procedures for violations. Section 5.7 covered security measures. Nowhere did it authorize searches of private property, photographing residents, or making accusations about weapons. I created a spreadsheet documenting every interaction with Officer Mercer, including dates, times, alleged violations, and witnesses. The pattern of escalation became starkly evident when displayed chronologically. My phone rang. It was Roger. That was intense earlier. Are you planning to file a complaint? I am gathering information first, I replied. Do you know who actually employs Officer Mercer, the HOA directly or a contracted security company? He is a direct HOA employee, Roger explained. The board created the position 5 years ago after some minor vandalism incidents. Initially, it was just neighborhood watch coordination, but Mercer has expanded it into something more aggressive. This was valuable intelligence. As a direct employee, his actions represented the HOA itself, creating potential liability for the board. By evening, 3 more neighbors had contacted me, sharing their own experiences with Officer Mercer. Mrs. Patterson sent the video she had recorded, which clearly showed him attempting to search my vehicle and making unfounded accusations about weapons. Sunday morning, I visited Thomas Weber, a retired attorney who served on the Architectural Review Committee. He invited me in for coffee and reviewed my documentation. This goes well beyond enforcement of community standards, Thomas said, frowning. Accusations about weapons, unauthorized surveillance, attempted searches. These actions expose the HOA to significant liability. What recourse do I have? I asked. The HOA bylaws include a formal complaint process, he explained. But more importantly, his actions potentially violate state privacy laws. The board may not even be aware of how far he has overstepped. I spent Sunday night researching similar cases. One precedent particularly stood out. A California HOA security officer had been terminated, and the association fined after conducting unauthorized surveillance of residents. Monday evening, I hosted a small gathering of concerned neighbors. 6 households were represented, each with their own stories of intimidation by Officer Mercer. He threatened to fine me because my children were playing basketball after 7 p.m., said one father. He photographs my guests and demands their names and purpose for visiting, added an elderly woman. We strategized together, agreeing to document all future interactions and share information. This was familiar territory for me, building alliances, pooling intelligence, developing a coordinated response. I explained my approach. In the military, we follow proper channels before escalating. We will file formal complaints, request a hearing with the board, and present documented evidence rather than emotional arguments. As everyone left, I felt a strange sense of purpose. The skills that made me effective at protecting weapons systems, attention to detail, documentation, understanding regulations, and threat assessment, were perfectly suited to this very different battlefield. The neighborhood had unwittingly placed me in a position uniquely aligned with my training. Officer Mercer had made a critical error in selecting an adversary trained in security protocols and chain of command. His power derived from intimidation and procedural ignorance. Mine would come from documentation and proper channels. This would not be a quick skirmish but a carefully orchestrated campaign. And unlike my usual duties, this mission had the potential to free an entire neighborhood from unauthorized authority. Phase 1 of my operation began with legally installing security cameras on my property. 4 discrete units, positioned within HOA guidelines for external fixtures, provided comprehensive coverage of my property lines and the street in front of my house. Each camera adhered precisely to the covenant's specifications, no larger than 6 inches in any dimension, painted to match. The house exterior, and mounted below the roofline. The system was connected to a secure digital video recorder with motion activation and time-stamp capabilities. The military had taught me that documented evidence outweighs testimony every time. Within 48 hours, the cameras captured Officer Mercer conducting drive-bys of my property 11 times, far exceeding his normal patrol pattern for other streets. Twice, he parked across from my house, using binoculars to observe my property. Once, he approached my mailbox but retreated when a delivery truck turned onto the street. Simultaneously, I submitted a formal public records request to the HOA board secretary for all meeting minutes from the past 5 years, specifically requesting any discussions or authorizations regarding security procedures, home inspections, or vehicle searches. Mrs. Patterson, who served as community liaison, called me 3 days later. "James, your request caused quite a stir at the HOA office. Apparently, no one has ever asked for complete records before. The board president had to consult their attorney about what they are legally required to provide." "And what was the determination?" I asked. "As a homeowner in good standing, you are entitled to all non-confidential records," she replied. "They will be available for review next Tuesday." This was exactly the response I had anticipated. The military had instilled in me that knowing the regulations often matters more than knowing the individuals enforcing them. While waiting for the records, I expanded my intelligence-gathering operation. I reached out to a law enforcement contact from my military liaison work, asking generally about the authority of HOA security personnel without mentioning my specific situation. "They have essentially the same rights as any private citizen," he explained. "They can observe public areas, report violations of community rules to the relevant board, and request compliance. They cannot detain individuals, conduct searches without consent, impersonate law enforcement, or make threats." I recorded this conversation with his permission, adding it to my growing evidence file. The records review proved even more illuminating than I had hoped. 5 years of HOA minutes revealed that the security officer position had been created with very limited scope, monitoring common areas, coordinating with the contracted gate guard for visitor access, and performing external inspections of properties for covenant compliance. Nowhere in the minutes was there authorization for photographing residents or their guests, conducting surveillance of specific homeowners, inspecting vehicle interiors, making determinations about suspicious behavior, carrying weapons or restraint devices of any kind. Most significantly, the minutes from 3 months ago included a complaint from another homeowner about overzealous security practices that had been tabled for further review, but never addressed in subsequent meetings. The final piece of intelligence came unexpectedly. While reviewing documents in the HOA office, the administrative assistant mistakenly included Officer Mercer's original employment application in my file. Ethically, I should return it, but not before noting relevant information. His resume listed his police academy attendance but not completion. References included a former supervisor at a security company with a note, terminated for excessive force concerns. Most tellingly, under reason for interest, he had written, to ensure community safety standards and enforce regulations against non-compliant residents. That evening, I received a call from a former board member who had moved to another state. Our mutual neighbor Roger had connected us. I served when Mercer was hired, the former board member explained. There was controversy even then. He was not our first choice, but he had connections to one of the board members. During his interview, he seemed excessively focused on authority aspects rather than community service. Was there ever discussion about his interactions with military personnel? I asked. A pause. Yes, actually. About 3 years ago, a retired Marine colonel filed a complaint about harassment. Mercer claimed the colonel was violating noise ordinances with his home gym equipment. The investigation found no violations, but the colonel moved away shortly after. There was speculation about whether Mercer had continued to target him. Do you know anything about Mercer applying to security contractor positions? Another pause. Yes. He mentioned during his interview that he had applied to Blackwater. This was before they changed their name, but was rejected while his roommate, a veteran, was accepted. He seemed bitter about it. Each piece of information fit the emerging profile, a pattern of authority overreach, specific targeting of military personnel, and escalation when challenged. The intelligence gap. Her phase had yielded more than enough ammunition for the next phase. I organized everything into a comprehensive dossier. Surveillance footage, documented covenant violations by Officer Mercer, board minutes showing limited authorization for his position, testimony from neighbors, and legal precedents regarding HOA security overreach. What had begun as a neighborhood nuisance had evolved into a textbook case study in procedural justice. The irony was not lost on me that Officer Mercer had selected perhaps the worst possible resident to target, someone professionally trained in security protocols, documentation, and chain of command. The evidence was compiled. Phase 2 could now commence. The quarterly HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening in the community clubhouse. Normally attended by only the most dedicated or disgruntled residents, this session would be different. Through careful coordination, I had ensured unprecedented attendance. I arrived 30 minutes early, dressed not in casual attire but in a professional suit with no military insignia or identification. The choice was deliberate. This was about community standards and proper procedure, not military versus civilian authority. The small meeting room filled quickly. Neighbors nodded in recognition as they arrived, taking seats according to our previously discussed arrangement. Officer Mercer entered and immediately noticed the unusual attendance. His eyes narrowed when he spotted me, but he took his customary position beside the board members' table. At precisely 7:00 p.m., the board president called the meeting to order. We have a full agenda tonight, so let us move efficiently through the standard reports. The treasurer and landscaping committee delivered their updates as I waited patiently. Under new business, I raised my hand. The chair recognizes Mr. Sullivan, the president announced. I approached the front with a portfolio containing organized documentation. Thank you, Madam President and board members. I have requested time to address a serious matter regarding community security practices and potential liability concerns. Officer Mercer shifted in his seat as I distributed copies of a summary document to each board member. For the past several months, our community security officer has engaged in practices that exceed both his authorized duties and legal boundaries. I began, my voice steady and professional. These actions expose our association to significant liability and undermine the very community standards we all value. The board president leaned forward. That is a serious allegation, Mr. Sullivan. "Which is why I have thoroughly documented each incident," I replied, opening my portfolio. "First, I would like to present evidence of unauthorized surveillance conducted against specific residents." I displayed enlarged photographs from my security cameras, showing Officer Mercer photographing my property with a telephoto lens. Next came time-stamped footage of his excessive patrols of my street. The HOA minutes, which I reviewed through proper channels, show no authorization for targeted surveillance of specific homeowners, I continued. In fact, the security officer position description explicitly limits activities to common areas and external covenant compliance. Officer Mercer stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. I was documenting violations." The president motioned for him to sit. "Please let Mr. Sullivan finish his presentation." I proceeded methodically through each category of evidence. The unauthorized attempt to search my vehicle, the unfounded weapons accusations, the pattern of selective enforcement, and testimonials from other residents who had experienced similar intimidation. Mrs. Patterson played the video of Officer Mercer attempting to search my truck and making accusations about weapons storage. The board members' expressions shifted from skepticism to concern. "Beyond these specific incidents," I continued, "I have identified 17 distinct violations of HOA procedures and state statutes regarding privacy, harassment, and impersonation of law enforcement. Each incident is fully documented with date, time, witnesses, and supporting evidence." I presented the legal precedents regarding HOA security overreach, including the California case, resulting in termination and fines. As a community member committed to proper security and safety protocols, I felt obligated to bring these matters to your attention through appropriate channels before they escalate further or result in legal action against our association. As I concluded, Officer Mercer could no longer contain himself. He shot to his feet, face flushed. "This is a personal vendetta," he shouted. "This resident has military connections and refuses to comply with community standards. I have been protecting this neighborhood from potential threats." "What threats specifically?" asked the board treasurer. "Suspicious. Owes individuals, potential contraband. His military position gives him access to restricted items." Officer Mercer's voice rose with each accusation. "Some people need extra scrutiny for community safety." "I manage weapons systems on a secured military base," I clarified calmly. "Nothing comes home with me, and even if it did, HOA security has no legal authority to conduct searches or make accusations without evidence." The board president looked troubled. "Officer Mercer, was authorization ever given for vehicle searches or surveillance of specific residents?" His response was telling. "I do not need specific authorization to protect this community. I know threats when I see them. Some residents require additional monitoring based on risk factors." As his tirade continued, more residents stood to share their experiences. An elderly woman described being followed while walking her dog. A father told how his children were photographed playing in their own yard. A veteran explained how his service decorations had prompted excessive inspections of his property. The board members exchanged concerned glances as the pattern became undeniable. This was not enforcement of community standards, but a personal crusade that had created a toxic atmosphere of surveillance and intimidation. The HOA president finally raised her hand for silence. "I believe we have heard enough to warrant immediate action. The board will recess for 15 minutes to discuss this matter privately." As they filed into the adjacent office, the room buzzed with conversation. Officer Mercer sat alone, staring straight ahead, his clipboard clutched so tightly his knuckles had turned white. What had begun as a confrontation on my driveway had culminated in this moment of community reckoning. The evidence was irrefutable, the testimonies compelling, and the liability concerns undeniable. All that remained was for the board to determine their response. The 15-minute recess stretched to 45 as muffled voices carried through the closed door of the side office. When the board members finally returned, their somber expressions told the story before a word was spoken. After careful consideration of the evidence and testimonies presented, the board president began, the board has reached a unanimous decision. Effective immediately, Officer Daniel Mercer is suspended from all duties pending a complete review of the security protocols for our community. Officer Mercer jumped to his feet. "You cannot do this. I have protected this neighborhood for 5 years. Who will enforce the standards?" "The suspension is non-negotiable," the president continued firmly. "Furthermore, we will engage an independent investigator to review all security practices and make recommendations for restructuring the position." The transformation was immediate and alarming. Officer Mercer's professional facade crumbled completely as he swept his arm across the table, sending papers flying. "This is because of him," he shouted, pointing at me. "You have no idea what people like him bring into communities like ours. I was the only one watching." 2 board members stepped between us as Officer Mercer continued his tirade. The outburst only reinforced the board's decision, providing a live demonstration of exactly the behavior residents had described. Security from the front gate was called to escort him from the building. As he was led out, he turned back. "This neighborhood will fall apart without me. You will see." After his departure, the atmosphere in the room visibly lightened. The board president addressed the assembled residents. "We owe you all an apology. It appears we have allowed security protocols to drift far beyond their intended purpose. Mr. Sullivan, the board would like to formally thank you for bringing these matters to our attention through proper channels." In the following weeks, the independent investigation confirmed what we already knew. Officer Mercer had systematically expanded his role far beyond its authorized parameters, creating what the investigators' report called a climate of surveillance and intimidation inconsistent with community values. He was formally terminated, with the investigation findings submitted to the state agency overseeing security personnel licensing. His security credentials were subsequently revoked. 3 months later, I received an unexpected call from the HOA president. "Mr. Sullivan, the board would like to meet with you regarding our security restructuring. Your military background in security protocols gives you a valuable perspective we would appreciate." Initially reluctant, I agreed to share my thoughts. The meeting proved productive as I outlined principles of effective security that balanced safety with respect for privacy and community values. Security works best when it is seen as a community service rather than an enforcement mechanism, I explained. Clear guidelines transpire. Inside, accountability and respect for boundaries are essential. To my surprise, the board asked if I would consider leading a volunteer security committee to redesign the entire approach. I accepted on one condition: that security personnel would serve the community rather than police it. 6 months after the confrontation on my driveway, Oak Ridge Estates had transformed. The intimidating security officer position was replaced by community safety coordinators who focused on education, assistance, and actual safety concerns like lighting, accessibility, and neighborhood watch coordination. The former security office, once filled with surveillance photos and violation notices, became a community resource center where residents could access information, borrow tools, and coordinate volunteer activities. Perhaps most importantly, the covenant enforcement process was completely restructured with clear guidelines, documentation requirements, appeal procedures, and board oversight. No single individual could target residents or make unilateral decisions. 1 year after moving in, I stood in my driveway watching neighborhood children ride bikes freely past my house. Mrs. Patterson walked her dog without looking over her shoulder. New residents were welcomed with information packets rather than warning notices. Roger joined me as I washed my truck, still adorned with military decals, still parked in the same spot that had once been declared a violation. "You know what is funny?" he said. "The neighborhood actually follows the rules better now that people are not terrified of enforcement." It was true. When rules existed to maintain community standards rather than establish authority, residents embraced them willingly. My military training had taught me that proper authority always comes with proper accountability, a lesson that translated perfectly to civilian life. The irony was not lost on me. An HOA security officer had attempted to search my truck for weapons because of my military connection, never realizing that my most effective tools were not weapons at all, but an understanding of proper procedure, documentation, and chain of command. My truck still sits in my driveway, a symbol not of conflict but of the principles that guide both military and civilian communities: clear standards, fair application, proper authority, and mutual respect. Sometimes the most important security is not enforced through intimidation, but built through trust, a lesson that transformed not just one confrontation but an entire neighborhood.